Ashok, let me begin by asking you a question. We've all seen this video now, and your own background is very different from the people in this video. You have a master's from the Delhi School, and then you work for McKinsey for many years at very senior levels. You advise corporations, transform corporations in that work. And then you were plunged into this world of HIV and sex workers and intravenous drug users and truck drivers and so on. Tell us something about that journey. How did that happen, which is really what this book is about?
Well, the reason I showed these slides right at the beginning is often I talk about this other India, and I thought it's very difficult to describe, and the slides come closest to it, and I hope it went part of the way. Why did I take this up? I think I can answer this in the McKinsey way. The McKinsey way was I saw a chance to have huge impact, and was an opportunity which is an opportunity of a lifetime. But if I answer it in a very personal way, which is that I was sensing a kind of restlessness inside me for several years before that. And I think that I was sensing that there is something else. There's an adventure, if you like, that has to be chased and got, and it presented itself to me. And the nature of these things is there's no coming back from that. So it was a blessing.
Um, Tell us about the first time you were taken to visit sex workers. What was that experience? I'm sure it was not an experience you've had before. So what was that experience like? What did it change within you?
Well, I'm giving away the first line of the book here, which the book begins. The first line of the book is, "Don't step on the people having sex." So I was in a field which was about 2 or 3 times the size of it, and the field was full of people either having sex or in the stage before sex or the negotiation before that stage. It was something I'd never seen. I was shocked. And the day went on like that. And the day culminated in my telling a group of sex workers, "You have to use condoms or you'll die." And I remember the sex worker telling me that she didn't say Mr. Smart Guy McKinsey, but she said, "Do you ever wonder why I don't use condoms? You're telling me about condoms when that's my trade. Why don't you ask me some questions which are a little smarter than this?" She was a lot more polite than that. And this is when I started unlearning my McKinsey training, because we were paid to tell clients, what the answer is. If I started asking my clients what is the solution to this, I'd get fired very quickly in McKinsey. It's only when I started saying, "I don't know the answer to this. What do you think we should do?" that the answers started coming from the community. Beautiful, elegant, tight. There was only the need for that little bit of support that had always been lacking, and the little bit of recognition that the power really is with the consumer, is with these seemingly marginalized women. So that's how it all started. At a personal level, I mean, you could say that introduction was a very rude shock, a rude awakening. But it didn't get better, it became worse as I went through scene after scene of absolute destitution, hopelessness, where women sold themselves for just 50 rupees. 15-year-olds injected drugs. Truckers, lonely people on very lost highways, practicing unsafe sex. And it went on and on, all human beings. And I think that gave me a feeling which today I can only, looking back, say it was a depression. So why was this the most elevating experience I've had in my life? The most fun, the most inspiring, is because I started understanding that we could also contribute, that business thinking also had a role. But more important than that, I saw that the power of communities, of women coming together, it was something that filled me with wonder. And I said, why haven't we realized this? Why haven't we realized this as a country? That the people at the bottom of the pyramid, especially if they are women, can solve the most complex problems that we face today. So that was an elation, if you will.
So one of the I don't know if the audience knows this, but I want you to go back to the early 2000s, late 90s, when HIV was rampant all over the world. And there was a tremendous fear that India would be swamped under this. And I remember a health secretary saying, "We're not going to have HIV in India because Indians are very moral people." And I just remember, you remember that Mr. Painter, I think his name was. What Ashok did with his organization called Avahan, that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, was to stop HIV in its tracks. I mean, that is the achievement that he and his team did. All of this, I mean, his book is the story of his journey. He doesn't, I think, quite humbly talk about the achievement. There's a little bit about it, but I wish there was more. But that is the achievement. The reason why we don't have this scourge in our midst as much as we could have, as much as some other countries experienced, was largely because of Abahan. So let me turn into a question and ask you, from your background in McKinsey, you had this sort of rude wake-up call, cold water thrown on your face. How did you both use your business skills, your business acumen, your business training, but also transform it in order to make this happen?
Okay, but let me say at this, and I'm not being humble, I shouldn't get the credit for this. If you can imagine here, thousands of sex workers, These are the women who have never got credit for this. And people like me get the credit. Avahan was credited with having averted over 600,000 infections. India's HIV prevalence today is 0.2%, a little less than in the United States. And this is a victory of women who will never be celebrated because of stigma. But coming back to your question, see, there's a technicality to it. We can talk a long time, especially you with your background. But if I put it in a nutshell for the technically minded here, in any health delivery or any business delivery situation, it's quite simple. There's a supply side, there's a demand side, there's an advocacy side. And we thought of it that way. There's a supply side is in getting condoms to the highest risk sex workers. If you have 100 sex workers, there are only 7 or 8 who are truly at risk. And programs focused on all 100. So we devised methods to get to the 6 or 8, but working through the community. But the most important part is the demand side. Think of Avahan as a revolution led by women from Manipur to Mysore to God knows 600 plus towns across India. It went viral in a way that, I mean, sometimes I feel amazed that it happened the way it did.
So let me come back to the women that you put at the center of this. There's a wonderful telling quote in your book in page 213 that to me was the core of the whole book. And I want to read that out. It's by Dr. Sushena, who ran your Mysore program. And she was from Manipur, or she is from Manipur. She's still in Mysore now, yeah? This is the quote that she says. Ashok asks her, what was the one thing that enabled Ashodhya, this is the Mysore program, to develop so rapidly? And she answers, quote, it was very simple. Trust and compassion spread like wildfire. They scale up very easily. Let me read that again. It was very simple. Trust and compassion spread like wildfire. They scale up very easily. I want you to tell us a little bit about what that quote really says.
So if I have to pick out one message from the book, I think it was in Shoshena's sentence, which was the reason for the scaling up. Think of it this way, sex workers are almost cutthroat competitors. They occupy small tracts of real estate, competing for the man who comes by. But they came together in a way in this program which showed true compassion for each other, love, the believing in a larger cause. And it came together so powerfully that there were women volunteering, standing in line to become volunteers in this program. And what does that tell us? I mean, there are issues I believe we face today which are settled with the stick, with fear. If I might say so, more today than ever before. Where is the room for compassion? There's a character in this book, a senior policeman called Gopalakrishnan, who died prematurely. The police were the biggest instigators of violence against sex workers in that time. And this cop, senior cop in Mysore, said, these are our sisters and some are our mothers. They're working for HIV. And within a minute, he gave an order that every sex worker's identity card would be signed by him personally. Successive police chiefs who came in said, well, Gopalakrishnan has done this. But he felt something there inside him. Now, in the range of human emotions, the compassion is a kind of a C word. Strong men, strong women, ordinary men and women don't like to say I'm a compassionate person. Or they might say, I'm very compassionate. I write a check of 1 lakh every year to feeding street children. To me, this is not compassion. Compassion is that old definition which I think the Dalai Lama gave, which is, can you put yourself in the shoes of that person for even 5 seconds? If you can do that, it is such a piercing feeling, it goes straight into your soul. And when I realized in time and again that this kid here is as old as my son, who's going to a privileged college, and I could visualize him, I completely broke down. And that was the portion I had to come out of, and where you saw something. Well, if I may, I'm not trying to give you a lecture on spirituality, but I want to share a type of meditation I discovered for myself. When I pass a kid who's knocking, scratching at your car window, or somebody who's a street vendor whose means of subsistence has been destroyed by the police, there's a meditation I discovered for myself that if you just close your eyes, you visualize that street vendor or you visualize that kid, and you visualize someone very close to yourself, your child, your sister, your mother, your very close friend, and just meditate on it. See if you can do it for a minute. If you can do it for a minute, when you open your eyes will be moist. It's a very interesting meditation. If you do it every day when you wake up, I find I have a better day. So this is something worth doing. I think I should patent this form of.
There's the McKinsey side coming out. Okay, so let's go back to the sex workers and to the drug users and truck drivers, all the various communities you have to interact with to get this under control. A very core concept to that is this idea of peer education, people helping themselves, that the leadership of the sex workers organizations were sex workers themselves. It was not some expert coming in telling them how to do it, them discovering for themselves how to help their community. Tell us a bit about that model. Tell us a bit about how that worked.
Well, if I go back to the supply side, demand side, and give a quick example on each, the sex worker, these are all things the sex workers told me. I asked them questions, they would tell me the answer. So I would say, how do you find those sex workers who are most at risk? They all look like women wearing saris. By the way, the sex workers practice very little in brothels today. It's hardly 6 or 7%. It's practiced in the street. How do you find them? They're invisible. So every sex worker knew 40 or 50 sex workers closely, just as each of us might know 40 or 50 people. They developed these charts, and it's very interesting. Most of them were illiterate. They would draw faces of 50 blank faces. They would start filling these in. Ears when a sex worker had had the message. And bindi when all the messages got through. A smile or a nose when she'd had through STI treatment. So at one glance, she could see there's an empty face there coming time and again. It's been there for weeks. She would go straight to her. So this is a solution a McKinsey guy, I dare say a World Bank guy, couldn't have come up with. Now on the demand side is even more interesting. When the sex worker told me, when I said to her, remember that sex worker, that you have to use condoms, she said, why don't you tell me something I don't know, why I don't use condoms? And with a sinking feeling, I said, well, why don't you use condoms? And she said, because of violence. I didn't understand that. It's only when I started gleaning that every sexual transaction was almost always an incidence of violence. The woman never wanted to use a condom. She would plead with the client saying, sir, you have a wife at home, you have a child, use a condom. She would be slapped, she would be beaten, she could be burnt. The worst could happen. If you could contain that violence, you would be controlling HIV because unprotected sex resulted. We actually ran an R-squared between incidents of violence and STI prevalence, which is a marker for HIV, and the correlation was extremely high. But the question came back, I asked the next question, but how do you contain violence? It's a societal phenomenon. And they said it's very easy. And the answer was absurdly simple. 10 or 12 women coming together, and this is a truism, 10 or 12 women coming together can defeat any bullying man. So these women would show up at the thana when one of them had been beaten or raped at night and create a hue and cry. They'd have a pro bono lawyer or a media person who's there in every small town in India, and the lady would say, sir, you've broken section such and such. You picked up this woman without another woman in charge. You are going to be in the newspaper tomorrow, and this is, we are filing charges. The cop would fall at the woman's feet. Word got around that this is a violence reduction program, not an HIV prevention program, and it went viral. It started spreading, that started in Mysore, it started spreading rapidly as far as Manipur. And I was kind of looking at this and said, well, we didn't do anything. I mean, what the hell happened here? And the answer is there. They came up with everything, all the answers to this miracle.
So clearly, this notion, this method that you evolved, that in consultation with the communities you were working with, is generalizable. It's not about sex workers, it's not about drug users, it is about how we do what we call development at large, how we address policy at large. How has this affected your current work? What are you doing now? I mean, what are you trying to, how are you applying these principles today?
Well, this is exactly right, what Vijay said. That even in year 2 of doing this, I started saying we aren't doing rocket science. We're applying pure business principles of supply, demand, advocacy. What if you could do this in maternal and child health, which is actually the biggest single area of tragedy in India? So I am working now with my own foundation called the Antara Foundation in Rajasthan, in bits of Madhya Pradesh. That's all the good news. Some of our innovations have gone to all 46,000 villages of Rajasthan, and we're seeing the results already. The bad news is that things like HIV, prevention of severe acute malnutrition, anemia amongst pregnant women are not the topics for which donors start lining up to fund. But therein is a story of Indian philanthropy and so on. I'm wondering, do we want to go to
Yeah,
questions?
let's go to the audience. Let's get some questions from the audience. Do you have a mic? Oh, there are mics here. Here.
Chip. Thank you for your talk and for your work. As a person living with HIV, I really appreciate it. However, it seems to me that among the affected communities that you rightfully credit with stopping the spread, there's a sense of abandonment now that the global funding priorities have shifted. How do you respond to that?
Well, I left HIV in 2012. I know what you're talking about, that priorities have shifted perhaps towards treatment far more than prevention with high risk groups and so on. Without being deep into the issue anymore, I think that's dead wrong from the way I look at it. Working with high risk groups has got to be the starting point of all of this. That's as much as I know.
It was such a wonderful talk, sir. Now, my question is, the meditative exercise that you were talking about is so profound and powerful. I heard about it and I can imagine how moist your eyes will be once you do that. But my question is, how sometimes, these emotions come in the way of doing action because they're so powerful. How do you strike a balance between compassion, emotion, and action, which is so practical? How do you strike that balance?
See, put it this way, there is a natural cycle. I think when a doctor gets into medical practice, he probably breaks down as a student with every case that he's got to see. After a while, you are in public health. You can't save every single life. And you learn how to deal with this. But somehow that compassion or that emotion can never be thrown out of the window. It has to be the soul of what you do. So you focus on the task. You focus on the task at hand. That's the only way of dealing with it. I mean, there's a wise book that somebody wrote several thousand years ago that says, focus on the task at hand. Don't worry whether it'll work or whether you made a mistake earlier. That's what I discovered in doing this. I think that can apply nearly anything.
We have time for, I think, one more question. How about this side? Let's go this side. Yeah, please.
Hello, sir. As you said that you have had a word with many sex workers. Have you ever had this thought, or your organization had this thought of adopting any such lives, if that is within your means, so that it could transform their lives for real?
Well, it's kind of presumptive to think that we can go and transform a sex worker's life. It's a little more complex than that. And what if you did that? By transform, if you're saying, I'll give her a means of employment that will enable her to make enough money to get her daughter through college and so on. As that sex worker said to me, will you do it then for 10, 100, 1,000, a million sex workers? So I never thought, that's a mistake I made when I said, you'll see it in the book, I offered money. That may have saved that one sex worker. but it doesn't solve a public health problem. So I never even tried. And I always took umbrage at so many people who came to me and said, why don't you get these women out of sex work? Well, why don't you win the Nobel Prize for ending poverty? It's the same question.